Linkin Park's Mike Shinoda opens up about life after Chester Bennington. Mike Shinoda is painting differently these days. In the months since the death of his foil in Linkin Park, singer Chester Bennington, the rapper, producer and visual artist has found himself approaching all of his creative pursuits differently. But it&apos is most evident when he puts a brush to a canvas. One recent painting shows what could be a variety of robot faces and skulls blending into a background of seafoam green squares. What it&apos been doing has been a little less figurative and a little more abstract, he says. If everybody knows that you&apos re going through a rough time and you just draw a stick figure, they&apos overanalyze it. Friends and bandmates recall ebullient highs and destructive lows of rock vocalist it&apos a hot, sunny May morning, and Shinoda looks serene in a white t-shirt and black ball cap, as he leans back in the booth of an empty Soho hotel restaurant. Although there&apos a big plate of pastries in front of him, he&apos rather nurse a coffee. When he speaks, he makes eye contact and smiles a little, even when the subject matter makes him uncomfortable, and he looks around the room as if he&apos trying to capture the right words. Mostly, though, he looks small, like the big, bright room could eat him up. But that&apos not necessarily how he would like you to see him. One of the harder things I&apos gone through this year is that everything I do gets read through the lens of the year, he says. Although he feels most comfortable obscuring his feelings in his visual art, Shinoda confronts everything he&apos gone through during the past 10 months in gritty detail on Post-Traumatic, his first ever solo album. It&apos the fastest he&apos ever made an LP, and the music sounds like classic Linkin Park, and indeed he&apos written some of it previously with the band and&apos 2017 LP, One More Light, in mind, but the unfiltered, almost freestyled lyrics make it feel like something new. Where Linkin Park once sang about existential, and somewhat biographical, pain, many of Post-Traumatic and&apos songs sound like diary entries. He&apos arranged the tracks mostly in the order he wrote them, beginning with Planes to Start, which ends with some of the condolence voicemails he received, and goes on to describe the Bennington tribute show the band played, over again, his inner struggle with grief, Hold It Together, and his anxiety to get through it, World and&apos on Fire, before ending on a hopeful note, Can&apos hear you now. Unlike with his paintings, there&apos sometimes an uncomfortable specificity in his songs. Hold It Together tells the story of how he attended a 6-year-old and&apos birthday party only for someone to bring up Bennington and&apos death, prompting Shinoda to make a dark, awkward joke. I shouldn't&apos have come, he sings, it&apos be where to go home, and I&apos am struggling. But Shinoda says he didn't&apos want to censor himself. I don't&apos think I held back anything, he says, grimacing. The only songs that I made that I didn't&apos want put on the record were just ones that I felt either they were saying something that was already being said on the album or I just didn't&apos like the song that much. Although Post-Traumatic is not wholly about Bennington, and Shinoda bristles at the thought of it being looked at as a tribute album, much of it is about his struggle to understand himself without having Bennington in his life. On Place to Start, a dreamy, seemingly stream of conscious number he wrote shortly after his bandmate and&apos death, he sings, Did somebody else define me? Can I put the past behind me? I think those thoughts are really natural, he says. When I wrote some of that stuff, I was like, and&apos no, should I say that? Does that sound weird and&apos, but I think it would be true for anybody in this situation. When you go through a difficult situation, sometimes you question stuff you don't&apos need to question. And I did. At a certain point, I was afraid just to write a song or record something, which is natural. it&apos, a feeling that Shinoda and it&apos' friend, Deftones frontman Chino Moreno, understands. In 2008, his band it&apos' bassist, Kai Chang, was injured in an auto collision and went into a coma. He died 5 years later. Moreno held off on reaching out to Shinoda about Bennington at first but eventually emailed him. They got together in the studio to record Post-Traumatic it&apos' Liftoff and that it&apos' when they talked about these types of feelings. The main thing we talked about was when do you start back up being creative again and feeling okay about doing so, Moreno says. For me, as a listener to the music he it&apos' put out so far, I can tell he was dealing with that question. The last time Shinoda saw Bennington was just a few days before the singer it&apos' death. He wanted me to meet this kid, Watsky, he says, referring to a rapper and poet Bennington had been championing. He loved Watsky, and he had mentioned him enough times that I was like, it&apos' well, let it&apos' meet him. it&apos, we went over to the studio that we had been working at, and Watsky came down and said hi, and we met him and one of his friends. And then they took off and Chester and I just kind of hung out there for a couple hours, just doodling around on some music. We were basically playing around with some mediocre music and talking about the shows coming up with Blink 182 that we were going to do. It was nothing remarkable, really. A few days later, Bennington was found dead in his L.A. area home of an apparent suicide. His friends told